Okay, welcome to my presentation on Art Deco in America. And as you know, I'm a tour guide and I've noticed these wonderful Art Deco buildings for the last 50 years. And I think Art Deco is one of the most exciting periods of American architecture. And the more I studied it, I discovered that it was a really interesting story about how Art Deco came to America and why America built more Art Deco than any other country. So I hope you enjoy it. Remember, you can unmute yourself with a question, and then at the end, I'll take questions and answers. So, Art Deco, America's most lavish architectural style. So, the origins of Art Deco actually were in France. In the early 1900s, many French designers were getting tired of traditional design and period revival architecture. They were experimenting with jewelry and furniture, but they weren't getting a lot of love. It was the architects that were getting the commissions and they were making the money. So they wanted to have an exposition highlighting these beautiful designs. But World War I broke out and they had to postpone this exposition. They originally planned it for around 1915 and they postponed it. And finally, in 1925, they had the Exposition Internationale des Arts Décoratifs. And it was a 4 month, can you imagine a 4 month pageant and with all sorts of pavilions sponsored by countries and by department stores and designers. It was like a World's Fair on steroids. And this is where Art Deco originated. And by the way, it wasn't called Art Deco. That term wasn't used until the 1970s by an American art historian. It was called Style Moderne. Now, when you take a look at this exposition, it was absolutely amazing. At the bottom left, look at the entry pavilion. Isn't that amazing? That was the pavilion they built for the entry. The picture on the bottom right is the Galerie Lafayette. That was a famous department store in Paris, and they built this beautiful Art Deco pavilion. On the upper left, René Lalique, who was famous for etching Art Deco patterns in glass, built this beautiful monument to the exposition. So it wasn't just architecture, it was interior design, jewelry, and furniture. 15,000 exhibitors, 16 million visitors, 20 country pavilions, but the US did not they did not have a pavilion. Herbert Hoover was the president, and he thought that this kind of design was not really something that America would like. Because modern architecture was just starting to come to America. However, many artists, designers, and architects came to this exposition, and when they came home, they brought these designs and they built some beautiful, beautiful buildings. Some of the pavilions kind of blow my mind. Look at the Belgium pavilion on the upper left. Look at the Art Deco detail on that. On the far right is the Polish pavilion. The British pavilion is at the bottom left. And what do you think the one in the middle bottom is? Look at the hammer and sickle. That's the Soviet Union. They were into a modern architecture called deconstructivism. They weren't into total decoration. But if I could go back in time and go to this exposition and see these pavilions, and could you imagine going inside the pavilions and looking at the furniture and the jewelry and the designs? This far surpassed the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, the Columbian exhibition. But 20 countries built these pavilions and they were a huge, huge success. But not everybody liked them. The modernists didn't like them. The Purist movement rejected all decoration in architecture. There's a famous architect called Le Corbusier from France, and he felt that houses should be machines for living in. You might be aware that in Germany, they opened up a school of design called the Bauhaus. And in the Bauhaus, the idea was less is more. Form follows function. And just to prove it, look at the pavilion that Le Corbusier planned. It doesn't have any Art Deco decoration, does it? It's called the New Spirit Pavilion. It embraces machine-made objects and not decoration. So by the way, Le Corbusier suggested that the cities could decongest themselves by building these skyscrapers outside of town, and there would be parks around the skyscrapers. If you go to Paris, Moscow, Warsaw, many of the big cities in Europe, you see these skyscrapers that were popular in the 20s and 30s to decongest the cities. Unfortunately, they seldom built parks around the skyscrapers, and they became, in my opinion, modernist eyesores. Believe it or not, LA has one of the Le Corbusier plans, which is the La Brea Towers, which is right above the La Brea tar pits, built in the 1930s, but they are surrounded by a park. So you have this incredible exposition that takes place over months, and the excitement for Art Deco was building and building. So I think this will show you what happened. So in the late 1800s, the Art Nouveau movement, which started in Belgium, was very popular. It was also in the Czech Republic and Czechoslovakia. It was a more sinewy, organic, curvy style. It lasted until the early 1900s, and then we had Art Deco from 1920 to about 1939. In the 30s, Art Deco would fade and it would become streamlined modern, which was a more machine age, transportation oriented style. And from there, we would have modernism. Art Deco died out with the advent of World War II. On the traditionalist side, we had the arts and crafts movement. The arts and crafts movement started in England, and the idea was to reject machine age design and to build things by hand. Picture the craftsman bungalow. The Gamble House would be a beautiful example of the arts and crafts tradition, followed by period revival architecture, Georgian revival, Egyptian revival, Spanish colonial revival. But Art Deco was a lot more modern in its orientation. That's why it was called style moderne. So I think this is an important slide to put everything in perspective. So a lot happened from 1880 to 1930 or 40, but then World War II broke out and there was really nothing interesting in terms of design. Okay, so Art Nouveau is more sinuous, curvy, and organic. Look at this house by Victor Horta in Brussels, Belgium. It's also a lot of it in Barcelona with Gaudi. Art Deco is more geometric and abstract. So that's one way to tell the difference. Art Deco had many influences. The Cubism of Pablo Picasso influenced Art Deco. Constructivism in Russia, which had more machine style forms, which is a little bit like Disney Concert Hall. Futurism, which was an interesting movement in Italy in 1915, had a lot of dynamic energy and movement and modern life. And then the discovery of King Tut's tomb really stimulated the artists and the architects to put Egyptian motifs and designs. The discoveries of the temples of Central America, the Mayans and the Aztecs, also influenced Art Deco. And of course, the mosaics of Greece, of Rome, really influenced many of the designs of Art Deco. So I think this slide shows you that Art Deco had influences from many, many different movements. So when you look at the Art Deco designs, they are very powerful. There's a lot of statuary, and the statuary is often of famous people, and it influences us. It's about heroes and strength and working hard. Paul Manship at the middle bottom, Prometheus at Rockefeller Center. On the top, we have famous researchers in medicine, and that's at the LA, I'm blanking here a second. It's in LA. It's right off the 5 freeway. The SC hospital. I'm blanking on the name of it for the time being. But design inspirations for the buildings. Design is inspiration to learning and to work. Often there would be a saying below the statues saying, work hard, wisdom, stability. Because I think as the Depression hit, people were depressed. They needed architecture to be decorated. They needed to be told that things were going to get better. And I think Art Deco had something to say about that. Also, the Mayan architecture influenced some of the designs. The top of the LA City Hall, which was built in 1928, looks very similar to this pyramid in Tikal, Guatemala. The discovery of King Tut's tomb influenced the Egyptian theater. So the Art Deco didn't come from nowhere. It came from many cultural influences. But American architecture really took a big turn, and this is how it happened. In 1910, they built this building on the left. It was called the Equitable Building. It was 40 stories from the sidewalk. Do you notice it has no setback? It just goes straight up. Because it goes straight up, it puts a lot of shade and shadow on the street. It made the street look like an ugly canyon. And when New York decided to establish a zoning law, they made the buildings get narrower as they got taller. So if you can see the drawing in the middle, notice how the building gets narrower as it gets taller. That was required to allow more light and sun onto the street. And this was established in the zoning law in 1916, the first city to do it. But a lot of architects said, hey, that looks cool. I don't care about light and sun. I just think it looks cool. So some cities didn't even have that requirement, but yet they set back their buildings like ziggurats or wedding cakes, which is pretty much only seen in American architecture. So look at the result of this. Look at the Atlantic Richfield building, which is a classic example of this wedding cake ziggurat design. That building was torn down. It was purple and gold, Laker colors, by the way. Then you have the Eastern Columbia building, which is the biggest Art Deco building on the West Coast, which is turquoise terracotta, once again, with this vertical emphasis getting skinnier as it gets taller. Love those buildings. And then we have the Babylonian or Assyrian Revival building from 1929. It's just off the 5 freeway. It's called the Citadel. And it's they did a beautiful job preserving it, by the way. And I personally have no problem with the fact that the building has a new use. It couldn't be a tire factory anymore, but they didn't destroy the facade. And it has that classic ziggurat appearance. New York is certainly the Art Deco city in the United States. And once again, we see this idea of the building getting narrower as it gets taller. Raymond Hood is the most famous American Deco designer architect. Look at his American Radiator building, black brick with gold spires and terracotta. Isn't that amazing? And then, of course, the Rockefeller Center, also called 30 Rock, is another example of classic Art Deco. I love the daily, I did an Art Deco tour. If you go to New York, do an Art Deco tour. Most of the Art Deco buildings are within 10 blocks of one another. This is the Daily News building. I think it's on about 40th Street in Midtown. Once again, you can see the building getting narrower on the right. But what I like is the lobby. Look at the globe lobby. A lot of newspaper buildings put a globe in the middle because newspapers are all about learning. And look at the sculpture on the upper left. That's called bas-relief, where the architect or the designer carves out a pattern in the concrete or the plaster, which is still attached to the wall. Now, this is called low relief because the figure does not stand out a lot of inches. It may be only several inches. Most Art Deco buildings had low relief, not high relief. I love the McGraw-Hill building. Isn't that beautiful? Look at the top of it. It looks like a radio. Some Art Deco buildings deliberately look like a radio with a grill at the top. Isn't it? I think it's totally bitchin'. And look at the lobby. Look at the Art Deco lobby with the smooth terrazzo floor and the streamlined features. So this is one of your classic Art Deco buildings. I highly recommend that visit. Please remember, a lot of these buildings were advertisements for the product. McGraw-Hill is publishing. They wanted an exciting building. They wanted an exciting logo. They wanted an exciting lobby. Now, the tallest Art Deco building in the world is the Empire State Building. It is not extreme design as far as ornamentation. It's pretty subtle, as you can see, but it's clearly Art Deco. And it blows my mind that some of those Art Deco details are 70 feet tall, and you can't see them unless you have binoculars. Nevertheless, the architects put these Art Deco details in, especially the lobby. Now, Chicago, wow. Oh my God, Chicago is a fantastic building for the city for Art Deco. This was the largest building in 1930. It was a it's called the Merchandise Mart. You can see the logo, which is in the floor of the lobby. And this is where office buildings for merchants and sellers would be. And it's a pretty, I think the building's kind of ugly on the surface. It's gray, cement, not particularly decorated, but it's absolutely gorgeous with the elevators inside. And it's got a lot of bas-relief sculptures, which is talking about saving money and being thrifty. Because after all, if you're saving money, you're going to make more money with your company. That's an amazing building on the Chicago River. This is one of my favorites, though. This is the Chicago Board of Trade building. It is classic Art Deco, beautiful lobby inside with lots of mosaic tiles. But what I love about it is the goddess of the harvest, Ceres. Her name is Ceres, C-E-R-E-S. She is the Roman goddess of the harvest. And wouldn't it make sense in the Chicago Board of Trade, since they sell cereal and corn and all these commodities? But here's the fun thing is, when they put the Art Deco statue at the top, they didn't put a face on her, because they figured there's not going to be a building that's 60 stories. Nobody's going to notice that she doesn't have a face, because there's not going to be buildings that tall. Well, they were wrong. Obviously, Chicago built the Willett Center, the John Hancock Center, and many tall buildings. So that is why the goddess of cereal does not have a face. So I think that's a great story. So I would recommend visiting that, you guys. It's a National Historic Landmark. The Chrysler Building's hood ornaments are like modern day gargoyles. And I took pictures of the gargoyles on Notre Dame, which influenced the Chrysler Building. So, and I just wondered if anybody wanted to unmute and ask me a question. I like the way it's going, but are you guys happy?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the famous Chrysler Building, arguably the most beautiful and famous Art Deco building in the world. Now look at what happened with Art Deco. Look at how Art Deco buildings are tapered as they get taller. Look what happened from 1950 on. Buildings look like cereal box tops. They look like ice cube trays in the sky. I'm not saying they aren't elegant, but they're definitely more plain. And that's why some people, including Frank Lloyd Wright, hated modernist architecture. Also, another fun part of Art Deco was called Jazz Modern. Some of the buildings look like a radio or the grill of a radio. So Art Deco radios were all the rage, and Art Deco furniture in the 1920s. So you can see how this is, by the way, on Sunset Strip. This is called the Sunset Tower, and it's been preserved beautifully. I think they're condominiums. It's one of my favorite Art Deco buildings in Los Angeles, and I'd call it Jazz Modern, because after all, we're in the jazz age here. That's why you should all have a cocktail. But Lee, you got to give a seminar so you can. Oh, wait a minute. I'm not drinking, but I should. Oh, and I wanted to tell you guys, there's a lot of Art Deco societies, and when they have a party, they dress up in the Roaring 20s outfits and they drink like fish. So on my tours, I noticed the type of Art Deco depended on the building. Schools had history and local heroes. Post offices featured local scenes. Banks were strength and stability. Government buildings had bold graphics. Skyscrapers had decoration inside and out. Office buildings really cared about their lobbies. Hotels were fancy and swanky. Theaters were palaces, opulent palaces. Restaurants were decoration to the max.
Hmm.
So let's take a look at public schools. This is one of the most beautiful public schools, Art Deco public schools in the United States. It's Will Rogers High School in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They love Will Rogers so much, they named it after him. Notice how the building has a vertical emphasis. It has bas-relief sculptures and beautiful Art Deco style lamps in their library. A stunning Art Deco building.
Hmm.
And when the kids, I read about this school, when the kids go to school here, they do a tour of the architecture because they want them to just absolutely love it and take care of it.
Mhm.
Post offices and banks tend to have, now a lot of the Art Deco figures are profiles. They seldom look you straight in the face. They're often profile because that sort of stylistic design was popular in the 1920s. The one on the right, however, is the stock exchange in San Francisco. In this case, the figures are looking straight ahead, but they're very stylized and very simplistic. That's typical of the 1920s style. You'll see it over and over again. Government buildings can be rather plain, but kind of elegant. Notice how the windows are recessed in and there's a vertical emphasis. On the right is the San Diego County Administrative Building. On the left is the City Hall of, I think it's Walnut, it's up in the Bay Area. I can't see the sign right now, but that's the courthouse. Courthouses were often Art Deco. So there were so many of this style that architects and architectural historians gave them a new name, PWA Moderne, Public Works Administration Moderne. Moderne meaning modern. And if you take a look, notice how the windows are vertically oriented and they're recessed. And in between the windows are usually zigzag patterns. And there's often vertical piers that are attached to the building. Those vertical piers are also called pilasters. Now, why are there so many PWA buildings in the 30s? Because there's a depression. Nobody else is building. Only the government is building. So we have a style of architecture that's government only, and it's called PWA Moderne. Hotels, on the other hand, oh my God, they went nuts. This is one of my favorite. It's in San Francisco on Sutter Street. It's Mayan Revival because they had done archaeological digs and they had discovered these Mayan gods, and they incorporated into the aluminum and terracotta tiles in the lobby. And I was taking photograph of this a couple of years ago, and there was a young man about to get on the elevator, and I said, "Wow, what do you think of the Mayan Revival?" And he goes, "What?" He'd never looked at it. He'd never noticed it. So as a tour guide, I try to notice this beauty around us.
Mhm.
And the elevators, oh my God, the elevator doors from the 1920s and 30s are absolutely beautiful. In Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and the Waldorf Astoria and many of these famous hotels, they are just classically beautiful. The elevator on the left looks a little bit Art Nouveau because of the curlicues. That's a little bit organic and plant-like compared to the ones in the middle, which are a little bit more subdued. But the elevator doors are just classics. I would say LA is third in the United States for Art Deco. I'd say New York is number one, Miami's number two, LA's number three, and Chicago's number four. I'm sure there's some Chicagoans who would disagree. I just went to the Biltmore the other day. Oh my God, even though the Biltmore itself is Beaux-Arts and Italian Renaissance revival, they have Art Deco murals inside. Look at these beautiful panels. You can see that they are sculpted into, to be honest with you, I don't know what material they are. They could be some sort of plaster, but I don't know, but they're absolutely beautiful. And they've preserved 7 Art Deco panels in the Biltmore. Post offices often feature local artists who were employed during the Great Depression. This is Ventura, this is the post office, and they're featuring the packing industry, because of course oranges and lemons are common there, and the dairy industry. And I think it's kind of fun. Some of the, maybe you wouldn't call it high art, but I would call it regional or American realism. But once again, look at all the figures. Aren't they all profiles? Almost all the Art Deco figures are always profiles. That's what was popular during the 20s and 30s. Corporations wanted to sell their product by their building style. Look at the top of the General Electric building in New York. Look at the elevators and the light fixtures and the symbol of electricity. One of the more beautiful buildings, I call it symbolic Art Deco. Theaters, oh my goodness. Theaters are so opulent. At the left-hand side is the Pantages Theater in Hollywood. Because after all, if you're going to go to a movie palace, you want to be awed by the architecture and the movie. At the bottom is the Chinese theater. The architect took a trip to China, was inspired by Chinese design. And up above is the famous Egyptian theater, which was partly stimulated by the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb. Here's my favorite theater, and I haven't even visited it. It's in Oakland. It's the Paramount Theater. Isn't that wild? That is such a beautiful Art Deco design. It's a mosaic. It's mosaic in the front, and inside it's terracotta and gold leaf.
Mm-hmm. No, no.
Libraries can often be inspirational. Look at the Brooklyn Public Library on the left with the figures of great learned figures. And then on the upper right is the LA Public Library. And I would recommend that book if you like history and architecture, Susan Orlean, the library book. The architect Bertram Goodhue put famous authors and philosophers all around the building. What a classic. The Griffith Observatory, a beautiful example of Art Deco architecture. And in front, they have all the famous astronomers in their sculpture. And that once again, they employed sculptors during the Depression for that. And inside the observatory itself are the Hugo Ballin murals. So I love the views from the observatory, and I'm just crazy about the architecture. And W. Griffith donated 22,000 acres to Los Angeles in his will. So we should be grateful to him, although he shot his wife in the face, went to prison, and was released 2 years later. He had an alcohol problem. Long Beach Airport, on the upper left, it's a good example of streamlined modern, but the tiles are Art Deco mosaics, and those are preserved. They're never going to be torn down. And the Long Beach Airport is really, really nice. Restaurants can be quite dramatic. This is the Cicada restaurant in the famous Oviatt building. You can see the doors have the famous Lalique glass. René Lalique was the designer I talked about, who etched Art Deco's designs in doors and windows. So if you go into the lobby, you'll see the Lalique designs. I've never eaten inside the restaurant. It looks pretty fancy to me. It looks pretty fun. This is not American Art Deco, but I had to show it to you. I don't know if Lee, if you ever go to Singapore, I know you go all over the world, but this is considered the most ornate Art Deco bar in the world. It's called the Atlas Bar in Singapore. Look at this. This design is absolutely incredible. You can see the bas reliefs straight ahead, a little bit above the stairway, the terracotta and gold leaf above. It's the most ornate that I've ever seen. So I had to show it to you guys. I had to do some ooh and ahs here.
Good Lord.
Isn't that amazing? I think I would get drunk in there, or I might forget to drink.
Yeah.
Now, the other great thing that happened during the Depression was the Federal Art Project. From 1935 to 1943, they employed 10,000 artists. They paid them $23 per week, and it was a relief measure for the artists. And they opened up art classes for children. They did all sorts of designs. They did blankets and paintings and sculptures, just amazing. They did coverlet. So you can go, if you just Google Federal Art Project, you can see they have a catalog of all their most famous work. They did quilts as well, Art Deco quilts. So you guys go to Federal Art Project, and they have a database of all these amazing Art Deco designs. A good example of the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, was the Coit Tower murals. They employed dozens of artists to paint murals inside the tower. And by law, they couldn't censor the content of what was painted. Now, I don't know if you can see the gentleman on the bottom right. He's grabbing a book, and that book says Karl Marx, Das Kapital. He's grabbing a communist book, because think about it, 1930s, communism was strong and capitalism was struggling. So this artist was kind of making a hint, maybe we need a little socialism in our life, and they did not censor that. And this is a great story. Newport Harbor High School was built in 1930, and it was built in a Spanish Gothic style. And they employed this husband and wife team, and they built these beautiful mosaics, a beautiful mosaic tile. But in 2007, they had to tear the tower down. But what they did is they cut out the wall and they saved these mosaics, and they brought them to the lobby of the school, and they rebuilt the tower to almost exactly what it had been. So they did a beautiful job preserving this Art Deco mosaic. And I highly recommend you go there. Any question about that, guys? And the principal will give you a wonderful tour. Also, you've been reading about San Francisco and the controversy there. Several of the public schools have WPA murals that show United States history as it really was. Up above, you can see George Washington and a dead Native American lying at his feet. In the mural at the bottom, you can see a slave owner and the slaves loading bales of some agricultural product onto a cart. So some of the parents and some of the school board said, no, we got to cover up these murals. They're portraying American history in a negative light. Other people are saying, wait a minute, these murals are meant to educate the children and meant to lead to discussion. So San Francisco has been debating these murals now for over a year and a half. They haven't destroyed the murals. They covered them up, and then they uncovered them, and I don't know what the latest is. This is another great story. Long Beach had this wild art. This building is kind of a Renaissance revival Art Deco building from 1932 called the Long Beach Municipal Auditorium. Well, they tore it down in 1932, but they saved the mosaic. And the mosaic was done by 20 different artists. It has 44,000 mosaic tiles. And it's called Typical Activities of Beach and Harbor City. And they preserved the mosaic, and it's in the promenade now, and it's going to be preserved forever. It's in the Harvey Milk Park. And Art Deco is very important in Long Beach because they had an earthquake in 1933. And when it destroyed a lot of downtown buildings, they built back with Art Deco, because Art Deco designs are reinforced concrete with rebar. So these buildings are not going to fall the way the previous buildings did. So Long Beach is a good Art Deco city. I love the Art Deco murals. There was really a love of transportation. The one on the upper left is in the Chrysler building. The one on the bottom right is the Bullock's Wilshire on Wilshire Boulevard. That's one of my favorite murals. And it's fun. The Bullock's Wilshire building, which is a National Historic Landmark, had no entrance. You had to enter from the back, because the people that went shopping entered from the back in the porte cochere, and the mural was above their head, because wealthy people did not walk into Bullock's Wilshire. They drove in, or they were driven in. They got out of their car, and the mural was right above their heads. Isn't that wild?
That is wild.
And I love the New Deal Deco sculpture. I love the Art Deco sculpture in the Hollywood Bowl, which was built during the Depression, George Stanley, 1939. The Lady of the Lake is a classic Art Deco sculpture from the 30s, Ada Mae Sharpless. But my favorite are these eerie winged figures of the Republic. They are at the Hoover Dam. So the Hoover Dam was built during the Great Depression, and these Art Deco sculptures were meant to protect the dam. And I think they're rather eerie, and they're huge. And when you go to if you do a tour there, just park your car. You don't have to do the entire tour. These winged sculptures are right there by the parking lot. Boy, the Queen Mary has amazing Art Deco. The Queen Mary was built in Scotland, and it was part of the Cunard line. And when it was built in the 30s, Art Deco was still popular, but it was a rather subdued Art Deco. It wasn't overly exuberant, but I love a lot of the pieces in the Queen Mary. Look at the etched glass on the up top left and the bottom left, and look at the Egyptian figures on the right. You might have heard that the Queen Mary is sinking, and the city of Long Beach doesn't really know how to preserve the Queen Mary. But Art Deco enthusiasts really want that ship to be saved for many reasons, not the least of which is the beautiful Art Deco inside. One of my favorite artists, I call this agrarian deco, are the murals of Ramos Martinez. He was a Mexican muralist who made money by coming to Hollywood and the Claremont Pomona schools, and he did these amazing murals and paintings. And he did this, because he had wealthy clients to make money. He also did some drawings on newspaper print. And once again, most of the figures are in profile, aren't they? They're these classic stylistic figures. And this mural, by the way, is 100 feet long. It's in Scripps College. And he died in 1947 before he could complete the 7th panel. But it is absolutely stunning. Now we have tropical deco in old Miami Beach. They call it South Beach. And they have these amazing hotels. You can rent a bike or you can be towed along in a, what do they call, a little rickshaw type situation. And I love the colors of Miami Beach. And this is the most famous Art Deco historic district. There are dozens of hotels. But we have our own Art Deco district in Los Angeles. So it's called the Miracle Mile. So you can see this picture from 1932 on the left, Silverwoods, and you can see it as it looks now. You can see that they preserved the buildings pretty well. This is just east of the La Brea tar pits. And one of my slides is out of order, and I apologize, but so many of the Art Deco buildings had zigzags that some art historians called Art Deco zigzag moderne. You've got zigzags in the Chrysler building and all over. And even, I love this on the bottom left, this is Union Station, you guys. Union Station, Los Angeles. This is Southwest Art Deco. This is called the Harvey House that was built with the great railroad stations, and the Harvey girls would serve people that got off the trains in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And this particular one, you've got to go inside there. It's opening up soon at Union Station. It's now it's actually a brew pub, the Southwestern Art Deco. And here's more on the Miracle Mile. I love the old May Company building, which looks like a perfume bottle. In back of it is the new Academy of Motion Pictures Museum, which is opening in September. It's got a huge observatory bubble. So that's going to be one of my first tours because I think people would love to go there. Here's the famous Oviatt building, a great place for live concert. It's turquoise Art Deco. And look at the Bullock's Wilshire. Notice there's no entrance in front, really. You entered from the back where the mural was. Other great deco cities would be Asheville, North Carolina, Cincinnati, Columbus, Ohio, Los Angeles. This is the one on the bottom left is the train station in Columbus, Ohio. So, you guys can drive along any major city, and if you have buildings from the 1920s, I guarantee there's going to be Art Deco. It might not be huge, but there will be Art Deco. Look at the sunburst pattern in the Eastern Columbia building of Los Angeles. But Art Deco would give way to streamlined modern. This is the aquatic bathhouse in San Francisco. Notice how there's less ornamentation now. The building has rounded, it's almost like an ocean liner. It's almost like a building as a ship, and they used a lot of glass brick. It's kind of like when you go out to Avalon, that's a good example of the casino building. So look at these streamlined apartment buildings. They became very popular in the 1930s. I love the one on the bottom left. And the one on the bottom right is in San Juan Capistrano. We saw that on a recent walking tour. Which one doesn't fit? Which one is not streamlined modern?
The one on the upper right.
Yeah, the one on the upper right, that's an Art Deco private residence. It doesn't have the rounded wind tunnel look. It has more Art Deco ornamentation. The others are more stripped down. A lot of homes were not Art Deco because it was too darn expensive. Very few homes were Art Deco. You had to have a lot of money to have an architect design one. I like Old Town Pasadena. Art Deco is adaptive reuse. Now this Art Deco tower is a Forever 21, but it's beautiful. They kept the tower. It's absolutely gorgeous. Classic Art Deco. And now a lot of architects are imitating Art Deco. On the left is the Grove. The Grove is in by where Farmers Market is. Brea is Art Deco. It's fake Art Deco, but what the heck? They're trying to bring back the movie palace. The Spectrum movie palaces are fake Art Deco, but what the heck? It's fun. Why not? Art Deco was associated with theaters. And this is a great story. The Cleveland Indians decided that their name was not really politically correct, so they renamed their team after the famous Art Deco sculptures, the Guardians of Traffic. So if you look at the bridge going over to Cleveland Stadium, you have these famous Art Deco sculptures of the Guardians of Traffic. So they decided, wait a minute, let's name the team after the Guardians of Traffic. So they are now the Cleveland Guardians. I think that's a pretty cool compromise. And I like those Art Deco sculptures. And I never knew there were sculptures that would prevent traffic congestion. I would say LA needs more. By the way, Napier, New Zealand is the Art Deco capital of the world. They had an earthquake in 1927. It was a 7.2 magnitude earthquake. It destroyed a lot of the masonry buildings. So Art Deco was popular, so they built back with Art Deco. It's not a big city. I think it's only 80,000, but they have more Art Deco buildings per capita than any city in the world. Napier, New Zealand. And the largest Art Deco sculpture in the world, that's Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro. That's a classic Art Deco sculpture, and I wanted to include it because it's so stunning, even though it's not United States. Also, I've been noticing, I'm concluding my show now, I'm noticing that along the freeways, we're starting to decorate our freeways with designs related to the region that we're in. They've done a good job in Arizona on the right-hand side, kind of bringing back some of the motifs and the elements of desert living. And then on the upper left is the Mission Bells of San Juan Capistrano. You know, I'm not calling it Art Deco, but I am calling it decoration, and we might as well decorate blank walls. And I'm noticing if you go up the 405 freeway from Costa Mesa, all of the bridges have zigzag patterns on the fences. So maybe they're bringing back zigzags. I haven't been able to find out. Okay, here's your quiz. You know Hoffy, he always gives a quiz. Art Deco or Art Nouveau?
Art Nouveau, I think.
Yeah, Nouveau.
It's
Art
Nouveau
Nouveau.
because it looks
Curve.
like plant material.
Curvy.
It's more curvy and sinuous. It's
Curvy.
not Art Deco, it's Art Nouveau. How about
Yeah.
this one?
That's Deco.
That's Deco because it doesn't have the curvy foliate forms. It has more decoration, but it's more modernistic. This, by the way, is the lobby of the LA Times building. They
Yeah.
saved this lobby, everybody. And there's the LA Times building, a classic Art Deco building. They saved the lobby. And I'll conclude now, and then I'll take questions. So here's my conclusions. And I just want to say, I just think Art Deco is fun. It spread from France. We built more than any other country in the world. We had fun with it, and we're preserving it, which I think is great. So Art Deco faded with the onset of World War II. Starting in the 1970s, historic preservationists put attention to this colorful style and started to preserve it. And I would say Art Deco is one of the most interesting and colorful periods of American architecture and design. I absolutely love it. My high school, South Pasadena, was built in the early 30s. It even has Art Deco on the bottom left. So I hope you enjoyed this look at Art Deco. I'll stop
And
my
I gotta run,
share.
Bill.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You have to go, don't you, Lee?
Yeah, I've got to go teach.
Okay, thank you, Lee. I like seeing
Thank you.
Okay, so I can unmute you guys so we can, I'm gonna stop this share to get some questions. I can go back to any slide you want. Let me unmute you guys. Can you guys can unmute yourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. Very good. So I'd like to know your comments about the slides or the presentation. I'm going to actually stop the recording. How do I end the recording? Pause, stop.